Bene, buongiorno a tutti. Ricominciamo per la sessione pomeridiana di questo convegno, incentrato sulla discussione, rappresentazione dei risultati del convegno PerFORM del lavoro, PerFORM Water 2030. Lascio la parola all'ingegner Bissolotti, nostro direttore scientifico. Anche a lui lascio l'eventuale presentazione di che cosa fa, perché fa tante cose, e quindi parlerà di ricerca, sviluppo, di laboratori, di gas della vita, tante cose. E quindi ricominciamo. Naturalmente dirò a Giorgio di cercare di mantenere sveglio l'uditorio, che dopo aver
I'll ask Giorgio to keep our audience alive because
è incline ad addormentarsi. Almeno a me capiterebbe così. Non dipende dal
coffee, they are
solo,
probably about to actually get asleep. We don't want them to get asleep. Thank you very much. And I'd like to introduce the afternoon session talking about SIAD results, and I'd like to then tell you about the context within which the results of a PerFORM water is included.
Dicevo, poniamo il nostro PerFORM water nel contesto.
Our PerFORM water in this context, and this is my duty indeed.
Quindi partiamo, scambio sedia, se no.
So let's start talking about SIAD. SIAD is a company that has been dealing with research since its foundation. It is in their DNA, and this has reached indeed then the gas field, technical gases, and then about the 90s they also approached water purification. Then very rapidly in 2015-2016 SIAD found new indeed stimulation when we founded the gas of life. What is a gas of life? Without making a complete overview, so within indeed wastewater purification, I must say that indeed the concept itself is easy, although not very well known, but with a great impact. If you think about gases in wastewater purification, you may think about certain number of gases, oxygen and digester, methane, CO, hydrogen, H2S, and if life in its biological portion produces these gases, these gases are also capable of reversing the biological process to our benefit. We knew that, but it's not that we knew that as it is, and there are other gases with a very important biological effect also on man. And in the years 2015, 2016, SIAD started with a great investment with this idea of bringing this concept of a gas of life in the fields of food, medicine, and environment. The environment sector is the one that concerns us today, but then this is a valid concept. So expressing this concept, a lot of things may come to your mind, but I mentioned four gases, not only oxygen. So if we were able to imbalance these gases in the biological process, apparently we are able to modify the bacteria to our benefit. So the biological process may not be the same as the one we know been now. So this is a research process that SIAD has started and will continue with that. And let's talk about the holistic approach. That is a term that has been abused, meaning let's deal with everything, combining competences. But let's face this in this way. This is a term holistic. I remember I chose to introduce this holistic term about 40 years ago, or even before. I had a big volume to read the acts of Vienna process. The afternoon was very hot, and so I took the time to read the introduction, and I decided to read even the premise, the introduction. The introduction had been written by a scientist and philosopher, and I said, well, it's hot, I'll read it. And the first words were, these are the acts of the process of Vienna, talking about wastewater purification technologies. And the question is, are you sure to purify wastewaters? If so, remember that anything you do is a transformation. So if you do good to one side, you do bad to another side. Are you ready to face this issue? And the introduction continued in this way. That was quite interesting. And it was indeed the first approach, the first environmental approach that was put forward quite aggressively. So are you sure you want to make your job? Are you aware that you are implementing a transformation? And there was also the concept of the various systems, of the various environments. You should be aware of the fact that if you do something in space, you may pass from gas to liquid, and vice versa. Are you ready to do that? That was a premise that was quite impactful, and you would not expect this in the premise to acts of a Congress. But this premise actually remained in my mind, and combining the first slide with this one, we had the opportunity to hear.
Ok, riprendo. Ecco, quindi uniamo la prima slide alla
So,
seconda slide.
combining the first slide to the second slide, we have this big opportunity to do it with the PerFORM water. When I was told by Mrs. Bazinet in occasion of this big project, PerFORM water, I said, well, that's good, but we can do it with a great effort. Following this idea, not only wastewater purification, but let's consider it as a whole with the strengths we have. And then 5 topics came out, and then these were reduced to 4. That was a big effort for SIAD, but we decided to do it all the same. And we started this pathway in PerFORM water that you will hear this afternoon. These concepts went along, and we all know that we talk about environmental footprint, environmental impact, but anytime I hear about them, they are smaller indeed, because it is the environmental impact of the wastewater treatment plant, of the building, and it's quite difficult to get out of this field. So it's not so much in our mindset to get out of our field, and you see it in the bottom. We're able to collect a lot of data to get out of our field, and this is not so obvious. And indeed, the premise dating back to 40 years ago is much better than the current impact. Preparing this presentation, which is the the introduction to what the other presenters will say, you see there's a law that has just been issued. If you read the title, it's the great holistic environmental impact that may fit to any service, any organization, and this is a directive on the part of the European Union, including 340 pages. But the basic philosophy is the one that dates back to 40 years ago. The direction is this one, to unite everything, to unite all the fields. So then you have to individually experiment, but once in a while you need to actually raise your hand and try to make the whole thing match. And we're still on page 5 here. But you see so many terms that are familiar to us, and they talk about purification as well. So this is not a directive, rather a guideline on the part of the European Union without a mandatory power on anyone. But this is a direction. This is quite clear. So going back to us, we combine these three things. And among the various company projects, we will focus on PerFORM Water, because there are many other company projects. PerFORM Water could start with the techniques, meaning having just a technical approach, so to see how much oxygen differs in the biological process tank. But we have to make an effort in non-focusing on the usual issues and topics that are, of course, important. Microplastic, these are the themes of wastewater purification software, and the importance of actually spreading the PCs also in the wastewater purification processes. So many companies are also going into this direction, but the big thread is still missing. So we as SIAD decided to deal with PerFORM Water through the three compartments: water, sludges, and gas. So the idea was to gather data, you see, with outputs, and we also face it under a microbiological way, micropollutants, greenhouse gases, and then each of us will state whether with this effort and attempt, if this was important. The wastewater treatment plant also includes greenhouse gases, about 100 kilos per day. Is it something on which we can intervene or not? So everyone will then give their own answers. But today and tomorrow, this kind of data will be presented to you. So to measure a parameter does not mean that there must be something wrong. It's just measuring under a scientific point of view. So I want to know it, and then I will evaluate whether it's important or not. So it's not that I measure because I know there is a problem there, but I measure it because I don't know very much about that parameter. So did we do philosophy with PerFORM Water? Not so much, because we have obtained quite important results. And also with respect to energy, to the overall energy of the system, the holistic energy of the system, which remains a guiding parameter. So if you have energy that you may use in a favorable way in your process will be successful. Whereas if energy is unfavorable in your process, but you're able to do it because you have the funds, that could be good for 2 or 3 years, but then it's going to die out. It's going to finish. So holistic is a concept that we should maintain throughout the processes. And of course, those who will read 384 pages of those European Commission guidelines may start understanding, fully being aware of these aspects. The real energy impact of your company will then be known to you. At this point, I finish, and I just would like to remind you the concept of gas of life and the fact that PerFORM Water has been a big project, not only for SIAD, but as a whole, because also in the initial edition, it was an integrated project. Integrated means even more integrated now, but PerFORM Water went towards the right direction. We just need to be brave enough or to be willing to widen it. And this morning we have heard about circular economy. And an interesting communication is this, that circular is not painless, because circular energy moves indeed actually energy from upward to downward, moving activities and money. And so what becomes more important is indeed the companies are downhill rather than uphill located companies. So it is like a transfer of energy. So the word energy comes about again, but we need to know what this transfer is about. So the big company at the top of the supply chains may not be so powerful anymore, because the power will be transferred to downhill company. And then let's consider the definition of gas of life, but also in wastewater purification, gas of life means gas having an impact on our life, on the biological composition of wastewaters in all their parts. And then I leave the floor to following presenters who will tell us about what we have obtained. So no more philosophy so far, but the direction should be fully understood, and why SIAD has started PerFORM Water with such a big effort, covering 3 fields and not only one. I hope I conveyed this message to you.
Thank you, Engineer Pissolotti, who communicated his own complex thinking that it goes beyond an exercise, a test, search. It includes an interdisciplinary approach. He mentioned the term holistic, and the gases of life represent a topic that plays an essential role in everyday's life, in everyone's life. And now I give the floor to Professor Eleonora Pasiletti, head of Laboratory of Biology and Environmental Chemistry. And because of the pandemic, the inauguration of the new laboratory has been postponed, but it is going to be inaugurated within this year. She is one of the most, how can I say, one of the best biologists, because she could have a direct experience with wastewater, sludges. So very few experts in Italy can say they have the same expertise in Italy. No, she's being modest right now, but I'm telling the truth. She has been working in this sector for 30 years. She started very young. She's not old. but she has conducted thousands of tests of microbiological analysis and trials and tests. She is able to present the outcomes also in the light of an incredible experience. Good afternoon, and thank you, Riccardo, for your introduction. I am not that young. After 30 years of work in a SIAD research lab, today we are able to present today here the outcomes of the activities within PerFORM Water. So the first thing I would like to do is to offer an overview of the activity itself, the project in cooperation with the partners you can see here represented by their logos. And this enables participants to have an idea, a comprehensive idea of the project itself. You can see a number of authors listed there, people and experts who took part to this project, and as a matter of fact, many more researchers and operators took part to this project, making it possible to attain the outcomes and the objectives. Many activities we carried out enabled us to attain results, but the results of this project open to new experimental developments. The research hasn't finished with the outcomes you'll be presented in these days. They need to be completed and implemented. So for us, this is regular research activities, because it never ends. As you go on with tests and experiments, the more doubts arise. This is our daily experience. So this slide lists the partners taking part to PerFORM Water 9. One is the Gruppo Cap that this morning was involved in presenting the whole project. We play a small part in the whole project. 3 research institutes and research institutes, IRSA, the 2 universities, one of them being Bicocca University. We couldn't cooperate with them. We cooperated with Politecnico because it is the scientific reference for the project, but we also carried out field tests and experiments. So PerFORM Water is a research and demonstration platform for technologies aimed at facing the challenges of the public water management sector. The project has been funded by Lombardy authorities and UN authorities, and the financing amounted to approximately 9 million euros. When we were proposed this chance, we realized that it was an excellent opportunity to grasp. We were aware that it was to become a hard deed, a hard commitment, but because our environmental lab deals with feasibility studies, and as laboratories, our activities are usually carried out on lab scale, on small volumes, or on using batch tests. So the idea of working on a full-scale plant was something so different that we were convinced, because we study the feasibility of systems and processes in laboratory, but we were offered the possibility to assess the feasibility of using ozone to purify water. These processes cannot be assessed through batch tests or on lab scale tests, because some conditions are not reproducible, cannot be reproduced in a lab. That's why we were so enthusiastic to take part to a project with very important partners. We presented our project, our ideas, which are based on 4 topics. So the research lines were 5. We can summarize them in 4 bullet points, which comprehended the waste treatment. You see the 4 topics: water, sludge, air, and biogas. We aimed at proposing technologies making it possible to optimize the whole water treatment cycle. So the process aims at one stage of the purification process. We thought about developing an entire purification cycle. We did not analyze and develop in depth all topics. We also had some hard times, also because we have carried out this project during the pandemic period, and this has to be taken into consideration, because it's not just not being able to work. We had to remote work, and Michela knows exactly what I am talking about and how hard it was. But it also changed the quality of the water coming into the plant. So all the outcomes, the results obtained by the initial analysis of incoming water changed. So we had to repeat those analyses, but we took the chance to assess other aspects we hadn't thought of. From other viewpoints, it was not possible to recover data and results. As for water line, we consider the possibility to optimize the treatment process with reference to micropollutants by using ozone. We assessed the oxygen purification process, so we're talking about activated sludge. And we also assessed the possibility to reduce the production of sludge, which is a tricky issue when it comes to plants. It also has economic consequences. We analyzed 2 processes of ozonolysis on activated sludge with pure oxygen, and the other process in anaerobic digestion phase. So one on the water line and one on the sludge line. Another topic that Paul offered a lot of challenges was to assess different processes of pollutant removals from the viewpoint of the impact on the surrounding environment. So we have heard about this topic during the morning session, and sometimes we did not agree totally on this. Assessment of air quality was only assessing by aerosol until some years ago. So the analysis was carried out in the surrounding areas, so the areas surrounding the plants. This constitutes a challenge to assess the overall emissions, aerosol emissions produced by water treatment plants, not only from the biological department, so we consider the aerosol, VOC, and other gas emissions. So we tried to do this by assessing the diversified valuation of plants like the one we worked in, compared to oxygen pure-fed tanks where there's no excess nitrogen component. As for anaerobic digestion, since the objective was to reduce sludge production, we wondered how we could reduce it by incrementing and by increasing the biogas yield and improving the biogas quality. This relates to the second topic I've mentioned, the reduction of sludge reduction. So we have carried out this activity in the plants, a cap made available for us, different plants, the ones that you can see in this map, the green ones. The plant we worked in is located in San Giuliano Milanese West, San Giuliano Milanese, and it has lasted for 4 years, quite a long period. So we indicate 30 plus 6 plus 6. The first 6 months period derives from the fact that many partners asked to continue some projects, some activities, because some of them were late at the beginning, were delayed because of problems that were later on solved. But in any case, the schedule was a little bit delayed. The second 6-month period was caused by the pandemic period that slowed down the activities and also changed some conditions with reference, in comparison with the start of the project. So you can see the image of the plant I've just mentioned, an aerial view. The different arrows show the different spots, different areas of the plant we have worked in. I'm not going too much into detail in this, but this gives you an overview on of the different sectors and processes we worked in. I want now to thank CAP Group, not just because they supported us so well, but also because they made a laboratory available in the plant, and this was very useful because it enabled us to work directly in the plant. And this was really helpful because in some harvesting campaigns, sample harvesting campaign, we were able to analyze the samples right there. So this enabled, facilitated these analysis, the analysis campaign. You see that the flow rate equals to 30,000 citizen equivalent of the biological activity sludge reactor, anox and aerobic tank. This is for the primary setting, and the secondary settling, and tertiary. We have filtration and UV disinfection. As for the sludge treatment line, we have a pre-thickener, anaerobic digestion, post-thickener, and dewatering. And in the middle, There is a part related to the revamping of a tank that hadn't been used for years, and it was used many years before, and it was made available for us to create the pilot scale plant fueled, fed by activated sludge using pure oxygen. We would treat a part of the incoming water, 450 cubic meters, and we would treat 70 cubic meters per hour, even though the output was not directed to the final receptor, but it was sent back to the plant, because we were not allowed to discharge the output waste, the output water, but the request was to reach the highest and the best quality of results, because we had to compare these results with the real plant, so the performance had to be comparable to the one of the real plant. The two plants actually did not work in conditions that could be compared. The real plant, so to say, with the pre and nitro, the nitro and nitro. We used a combo system, the nitro and nitro, so the operational parameters were different. Therefore, the comparison can be done with certain limits. Now, I would like to offer you a brief overview, some food for thought, so that you can see the four topics, and the other speakers will provide you with more details. So we evaluated the ozone performance in reducing sludge on the secondary and on in anaerobic digestion. This speech and the following on, I added this part here because this gives me the chance to provide some information for tomorrow's participants who are not here today. As for using ozones to reduce sludge yields in the secondary process based on activated sludges, you see the experimental plan results, and details in black and green color are indicated. Different periods when the plant used and didn't use the ozone. So before and after, the plan was to have 2 cycles for conditions, but it was not possible. The other important thing was to evaluate the plant functioning in different temperatures, especially when it comes to nitrification, because it's very sensitive to temperature changes. So we needed to evaluate the effect of ozonolysis on nitrification in winter and in summertime. You see here some images to the left, a detail of the tank, of the basin. You may wonder why the level is low. It was low to be able to set operating parameters that can be compared to the air-fed plant. So we had to lower this level. In the middle we have the contact reactor and the ozone reactor to the right. I'm not going to list all the process parameters. You can have a look at them right now, but I'd like you to focus on the second parameters, the sludge load that indicates 0.25 GOD on the volatile solids. There is is a range here. This is what I was saying at the beginning, the variation of loads, besides the regular standard variations, the reducing variations were those recorded during the pandemic, because we need to remember that many companies and industrial works were not working, so the pollutants produced also were producing lower amounts. In short, the variations due to the COVID period enabled us to assess very different performances, diversified performances, but we guaranteed the improvement settling. And we evaluated, taking different viewpoints, that ozone could not influence the biological process, not interfering with the regular standard activity, biological activity, with particular reference to nitrification. So overall, no inhibition effect was recorded, and it seems to we're saying something unoriginal, that the cellular growth rate was lower, it was so, and we also attained the reduction of sludge production. As for the tertiary treatment with ozone to remove micropollutants, we designed, installed and managed this pilot plant, 2 columns 6 meters high, overall volume 650 liters, 325 liters per column. We used pure oxygens from the bottom with porous disc. This activity lasted for over 1 year, 10 sampling campaigns lasting 2 or 3 days in a row in the operating plant, and the treated waterfall was the one coming from the filtering. And we also consider the ozone dosages. We actually, I would like to talk about the ozone we use, 1 pi and 0.4 milliliters, and the speech that will be delivered in late afternoon will give you more details. This slide gives you an idea of what we mean when we talk about emerging micropollutants, already explained by Professor Antonelli this morning. You see where the panel of micropollutants is mentioned. You see what the CR and ERS Brugherio has done, the evaluation of the most important and meaningful micropollutants, identifying 12 pharmaceuticals, antidepressants, antibiotics, antihypertensive and anti-inflammatory ingredients, active ingredients. There is also corrosion inhibitor substance that was taken into consideration, and other fragrances used in detergents and cleaners we use every day for personal cares, and other parameters that will be presented in more detail later on. As for the evaluation of the impact in terms of aerosols, of water treatment process, I have mentioned the parameters we considered to try and achieve an overall balance. We didn't succeed completely because we achieved a lot of results, but also many doubts and questions still to be answered. But this is what research is about, finding confirmation of two hypotheses, but also to continue experiments and research. There are some pictures in this slide representing the sampling system we have used at the moment. The experimental plan may seem difficult to describe because it seems boring to say that we have harvested samples at the beginning of the process, at the end. I'm not going to describe all the air biological, oxygen biological process and so on and so forth, but I had the chance to talk to partners during the lunch break. We said that the volume, the amount of results we have attained is really extraordinary, and data still need to be processed and evaluated, and most of activities have been completed, but it is also true that results can be interpreted in many ways from different viewpoints. So one individual result can bring about many other results if seen from different viewpoints. From a different viewpoint. So this means that we are going to continue our activity, our research. So I'm not asking you to observe all numbers and colors, but this slide shows how we mapped the plant on all treatment lines when it comes to sampling sludge, water and air. As for the greenhouse gases and VOC, we highlighted both in the air. One may say this is not such big news, but as I was saying at the beginning, our objective was to combine all these figures, all these data to try and understand whether they can represent an inspiration, so to say, to improve the processes if I mobilize wastewater or sludge. Obviously, some substances pass from solid matrix to the air one. So we need to understand, as Bissolotti was saying, whether this is really important to us, something interesting to continue to do. And now I'm referring to what Professor Antonelli was saying. We need to assess risks in order to understand whether all these data, be it milligram for cubic meters, 1 milligrams for liters. Well, we need to understand whether this is important or not, what value we attribute to these data. I would say the pivotal point referred to peroxide and methane in alternated cycles of oxidation. From a certain viewpoint, in an air-fed oxidation tank, we provide oxygen to a certain level, then oxidation stops and the oxygen level goes down. to a minimum set point, and then it starts again. During this phase, anoxic phases develops, favoring the release of, for instance, greenhouse gases. So maybe we are talking about meaningful or non-meaningful mass figures. What's their value? As for the biological tanks, the evaluation of greenhouse gases was made using a flow chamber to funnel the outgoing gases to evaluate their amount in the air, released in the air, as the OC. They come from the sewage collector, and to a lesser extent, the tanks. We identified chloride-based pollutants, aromatic pollutants in different concentration levels that will be better described in tomorrow's presentation. As for the bioaerosol, we have evaluated different parameters, and something that was new to us in this project was to assess the presence of bioaerosol gases at man's height, but also in the atmosphere. We wanted, so these matters are still present at 5-meter height or not. Obviously, the answer was it depends on the conditions, wind, the position, if it's sunny or not, so the conditions of the surrounding environment. I am smiling, but this is how things stand. This is exactly what happened. So we use different parameters for the bacterial count and pathogens. The main evidence that emerged was that a critical point in the plant is the sewage collector, which can be anticipated, and the biological processing tanks showed results and values that can be found also in the literature with small differences between oxygen, pure oxygen, and activated sludge tanks. The two blocks of right and left are the two control ones. So difference in the air around the processes was reported, and we also wanted to evaluate the particulate. It was the first approach we had with this world, this large world. Main outcomes are the following. So the most present fractions were lower to 1 micron, which are those important from the healthcare viewpoint. These are the smallest particles that can be that can reach our lungs, and also the concentrations were depended on the conditions, weathering when samples were taken, and in particulate we identified the presence of a fragrance in the particulate. So this is something worth noticing. And I have synthesized the results. This is the slide wraps up what I have said.
So this is a result of a synthesis of all of the activities. Just to recap with some figures, the results of our activities on anaerobic digestion. You see also important figures. So you have the increase in biogas, which is quite important. There's some in real scale and some in other lab scale with sludge minimization and a significant reduction of H2S. With regard to biological process, indeed the ozone releases allowed us to significantly reduce sludge production and the possibility of containing, aerosol reduction of those four parameters. And concerning the tertiary effluent, for the reduction of micropollutants, ozone allowed us to obtain 100% removal rate of most of contaminants. Some they were ozone refractant, but it was possible to obtain higher yields with ozone from 20 to 80 and something more with the implementation of peroxidize. And an important thing that with regard to ozone treatment, and especially for tertiary effluent treatment, we evaluated the toxicity percentage. We said that this morning. Not all substances can be transformed in CO2 and water. For us, it's important to understand whether ozone treatment may lead to formation of undesired products that normally would not be taken into account. So we have faced this aspect, measured toxicity test as required by the regulations, but also mutagenesis test. Then I really feel like thanking everybody, all the people who collaborated with us, all of our partners of our company and all of the colleagues. We also would like to remember our colleague Alessandro who passed away last year. Thank you very much.
Devo effettivamente fare un ringraziamento.
I really would like to thank you for your wonderful work. And indeed, you joined our group when you were a baby girl, really. But we had understood that she was the best biologist that a treatment plant could have, and I thank her for remaining with us together with her assistant, engineer Peroni, not only biologists, but also engineers. And I can tell you that what we have done has been very important, and what we have learned from uranyl carbide. We started with the 3 tester, so the experience we have understood is necessary, but we had to demonstrate whether that product could be treated or not with the pilot plant. So before the pilot plant, there is this tester, because this tells us how we can introduce the application. And of course, you have heard that at the Polytechnic University they make experiences, but they are actually conducted in the lab, and as a performance tester, no experiments understood were made, so this is completely different. You have heard our Mrs. Posinetti explained the difference between operating on the field or in the lab. So I really thank her for all the work you have carried out, and going back to my usual saying, insisting on the problem of air and aerosol. And before, indeed, I was tempted by what Pissolossi was saying of this holistic approach, meaning that when you face a project, you need to face it in all of its aspects. And I also would like to remind you of something Francis Pope said in his first encyclic and addressing ourselves, technicians, that remember, when you solve a problem, you start a new one. So this is very important. That's why I've always insisted on air, because every time I talked with our customers and to bring about oxygen, the problem was that oxygen was more expensive. But if you had to treat the air coming out of the treatment plant, you should do it. And in a closed tank, you would understand that the accounts are in favor of oxygen. But I wouldn't say that anymore, because this bothers a lot of people. But now you have found the ozone, and I believe that from experiments that have been conducted enhancing the effect of ozone, we're going to set things back to their order. We reestablish things. And so where's my engineer Riccardo? Now he has the duty to demonstrate to clients that using oxygen they save energy. So thank you, Engineer Caldara. And now I'd like to say that I was right, because Eleonora is really very good. Do you agree with me?
E quindi introduco la penultima
relazione, clapping hands, and so I'd like to introduce the presentation by Severino, Davide, and Peroni. And so now we have the final demonstration that to be engineer, you don't need to be a man, and now we will listen to them. So please tell us in 45 minutes, and then there will be half an hour coffee break concerning more technical aspects, probably more difficult to be narrated, but please join the podium. Good afternoon, everybody. We will talk about ozonolysis, specifically applied to anaerobic digestion. And so this work was conducted together with a CAP group and Polytechnic of Milan. The results of this research activity has been put together in a publication that will be issued together with the next issue of Ingegneria dell'Ambiente, Environment Engineering, and then you will find these results in this publication as well. So let's talk about the purpose of the research. That was to increase the anaerobic biodegradability of the sludge fed to the anaerobic digester in order to increase biogas production and reduce discharge sludge. So to increase the biogas production, but also its quality. The experimental plan included 2 lines of research, of testing that were conducted in parallel, a full-scale test and a lab-scale test. And I will tell you about the full-scale test. So San Giuliano West plant in the sludge line configuration treats a mixture of primary and secondary sludge, including 60% of primary and 40% secondary sludge as regards hydraulic flow rates, so 40 and 60 compared to the suspended solids content. And so the SRT of excess sludge is about 30 days. Treatment units were already presented by Eleonora. So pre-thickening, anaerobic digester, post-thickening, dehydration, and drying, sludge drying. So a note on anaerobic digester. This was operated with a very variable load during testing from 0.5 to 2 kilos of volatile solids cubic meter per day with an HRT from 16 to 20 days. The digestion plant, in the absence of zonalizers, would have median values because the median is a more representative value of about 300 cubic meter per day with a methane fraction of 67%. So then the field test included the installation of a contact reactor next to the pre-thickener, and the sludge coming out of the pre-thickener was fed to the contact reactor and then to the thickener itself. Substantially, we created an internal recirculation in the pre-thickener, and in future we want to treat sludge coming to indeed the blend, but in this phase we did not rely on the security of this, so we treated the sludge in the pre-thickener that was then fed to the anaerobic digester. You see the various parts of the plant, pure oxygen, feeding ozone generators, sending the gas to the contact reactor. There was a recirculation within the pre-thickener, and then the treated sludge was sent to the anaerobic digester. So the characteristics of the sludge being treated without dealing with individual figures, but just to tell you that sludge had a total solid contact of 22 milligram per liter with a volatile fraction, total volatile fraction of 63%. COD, soluble COD was 300 milligram per liter, and total organic nitrogens was 10 milligram per liter, of which 35 were dissolved in the surfactant. The surfactant was detecting a contact of volatile fatty acids of 352, and then protein and carbon 3,000 and 7,000 milligram per liter as a whole, but in the dissolved portion of 5 milligram per liter in carbohydrates and 75 milligram per liter for proteins. Finally, in green, the BMP, that is a test measuring the beta imaging the biochemical methane potential of a sludge, and that is expressed in millimeter of methane per gram of volatile solid. And then the sludge at the entry of a pre-thickener had this value of 140 milligrams per gram. That is quite low, but very variable. And the variation coefficient was equal to 50%. So it could be either 70 or 210. So how much ozone we have dosed? So if we refer to the gas flow rate to the pre-thickener, the dosed ozone was from 2 to 10 gram of ozone per kilogram of volatile solid. If we refer just to the contact reactor, where we treated a lower flow rate to the pre-thickener, this dosage changed from 10 to 40. So under a certain point of view, having treated a lower portion allowed us to also evaluate the performances and yields at different dosages. So a low dosages at the pre-thickener and another one calculated only at the contact reactor. So having to say something about the pre-thickener. The pre-thickener has a contact time of 1 day. Arianna was telling us this morning that these advantages element is that by treating that sludge, we actually give oxygen to the sludge, not only ozone. And this oxygen may determine the starting of anaerobic processes. So consuming substances you would like to keep for anaerobic digestion. So it is a kind of vicious cycle. But we made this choice, and so we actually pay a little bit for the fact that in the retention period of 1 day in the pre-thickener, we lose something, and so results are underestimated compared to what could be obtained. In these graphs, where we had to make a statistical analysis of data because sludge characteristics underwent a strong variability during testing. And during testing, we encountered several difficulties under an operational point of view and also with respect to the plans. And we will see some pictures then, just to confirm that the reality is much different from the lab scale. So full scale is different than lab scale. We have indeed perceived this. From these diagrams, you see that along the pre-treatment chain, so incoming into the pre-thickener, the outcome from a pre-thickener, and then the output from the pilot plant. So what does ozone do? It dissolves organic and nitrogen material and makes it available to the anaerobic treatment that occurs downhill. So the ozone task is to make a substance available that otherwise would not be available.
Scusate. In particular,
what we see about in the diagram on the top left is the increase in the dissolved fraction of COD. We had 370 milligrams per liter of dissolved COD, and now we have 500. For nitrogen, we had 1 times 3, so at about 40, we reached 120 20 milligram per liter of dissolved nitrogen. But what is even more evident was the increase in carbohydrates that determined an increase of 9 times of contact of dissolved fraction and 6 times the increase of proteins. So what did ozone do? The ozone actually lysed the polymeric conduct of the sludge consisting of carbohydrates and protein. We have detected them as carbohydrates and proteins, but also as COD and organic nitrogen. So in addition to the dissolution of the organic nitrogen substance, there was also an increase of VFA, sludge content, and consider that VFA, indeed, the constituents, the feed of the methane generation process, so that methane is then produced from volatile fatty acids. So the ozone takes a place in a phase that otherwise would occur biologically and would produce this VFA useful for the methane generation. Why does it produce VFA? Because there is a hydrolysis of long chains of fatty acids and transform them in VFA or in oxidation processes of carbohydrates, because carbohydrates, when they oxidate, they indeed make this transformation. Along the treatment chain, we have characteristics of methane generation of the sludge, and what we have seen is an increase by 40% with reference to the pre-thickener. You should consider the note I said that 14% probably pays for a loss by aerobic oxidization and 22% out of contact reactor, where the dosage was higher, about 20 milligram per liter of VS. And the idea of installing in full scale was to be able production of methane indeed in the gas meter, because so far we talked about lab tests, analysis, confirmation with the MP, but we wanted to see an increase in the production of methane also in the gas meter. We really had a lot of problems during testing, and it was difficult to have a long functioning period. We were able to do that over the last month when the pilot plant operated continuously for 1 month. That was a retention period of anaerobic digester. But being able to evaluate the effect of ozonolysis on the anaerobic digester was not possible to see it from data we collected due to the variability of conditions and also due to the various issues we encountered. So a multivariate statistical analysis was carried out for the main component, where substantially all figures that have been collected have been subdivided into main components. One main component that collected all data related to the operating conditions of the plant, and a second main component that was more linked to the functioning of ozonolysis, and they were all treated within this statistical analysis. In this graph, the red points represent data with ozonolysis functioning, and in blue we have data without the
Quindi,
ozonolyzers.
colpo d'occhio ci
So
dice che
we
le due
immediately
serie di dati
perceive that the two
sono
series
diverse.
of data
Quindi
are
l'ozonolisi,
different.
che è l'unico elemento che li
Ozonolyzers, which is the
differenzia,
only element
ha
that
creato una
differentiate them,
modifica nelle condizioni
created
nel
a
funzionamento
modification in the
dell'impianto
functioning
di
of
gestione
the
anaerobica.
plant
In
of
più,
anaerobic
questi dati nel
digestion.
circolo rosso rappresentano i dati raccolti
Moreover,
dopo
these
almeno
data
un
in
tempo
the
di
right
detenzione
circle
di gestore anaerobico.
represent
E
data
questi si
after
sono
one
staccati
period of
nettamente.
anaerobic
Quindi,
digestion,
al
and these
raggiungimento
were
dell'equilibrio
completely
del processo
separated,
anaerobico
and
è
to
stato
reach the balance
possibile
of anaerobic
proprio
process,
identificare
so
un
it was possible
incremento della produzione del
to
biogas.
identify an
Incremento della
increase in
produzione
the
che da un'analisi
biogas production
rispetto a questi
that
è stata
compared
dell'ordine
to
proprio del
this,
20%.
we
Abbiamo
had like a
ritrovato quel
20%.
20% che avevamo visto
So we found again that
nelle prove di
20%
nell'analisi del BMP.
we had
Abbiamo
found
ritrovato
in
anche
the
sulla
analysis
misura del metano
of the
prodotto
BMP
dall'impianto.
in the methane
Un altro
produced by the
aspetto
plant.
importante
Another important
che è stato
aspect
rilevato è
that
che
was
durante il funzionamento dell'ozonolisi
detected
c'è
that
stato un
during
abbattimento del
ozonolysis there was a
50%
50% reduction of
L'impianto di San
H2S.
Giuliano ha valori
In
di
San
H2S
Giuliano,
nel biogas molto
H2S
elevati.
values in
Siamo intorno ai
biogas are quite
2500
high, about
ppm. Durante
2,500
l'esercizio del
ppm,
processo
and
di
during
ozonolisi abbiamo
the
raggiunto i 1200
exercise of
ppm,
ozonolyzers,
quindi
we
dimezzato. E poi
reached
dopo, nel
about
momento in cui è
200
stata
ppm, and
spenta
when we
nuovamente
actually
l'ozonolisi, l'H2S è risalita.
deactivated ozonolyzers,
l'evidenza
the
che è stato proprio il processo
H2S
di ozonolisi.
was
La
increasing
riduzione
again.
come dicevo
So we
prima,
have the evidence
l'ingegner
that
Bisclotti
was
merita
the
gas della vita.
ozonolyzers
La riduzione
result.
dell'H2S è sì
The
un
reduction
effetto
of
dell'ozonolisi,
H2S is
ma
an
l'aver
effect of
ridotto
ozonolyzers,
l'H2S ha
but having reduced
probabilmente
H2S
influenzato
probably had an
l'attività
impact
metanigena,
on
cioè
the
ha
methane
reso
generating
l'ambiente
activity,
del digestore
meaning
anaerobico
that making
più
the
compatibile
environment
alla
of
produzione del metano.
anaerobic
E quindi c'è
digesters
stato anche un
more
incremento
compatible
della produzione
to
di
the
metano. Quindi in
production
questo caso il
of
ciclo è
methane, and in this case we have a virtuous cycle.
Adesso passo la parola
I'm
a
giving the
Davide,
floor
che
to
vi
Davide,
esporrà
who
i
is going
risultati
to
delle
describe
prove a
the
scala
results of the lab scale tests, together with full-scale test. We carried out these lab scale tests, aiming at confirming the results of the full-scale tests, and on the other side they aimed to identify the best ozone dosage for the substrates, and also to carry out an economic sustainability analysis. So the lab scale tests were carried out on the pre-thickened sludge and on the digested sludge. For fresh sludge, we used net dosage from 20 to 40 grams, and for the digested sludge, 100 to 185. Tests were carried out on glass column, and ozone was inflated to the bottom, and we were able to measure what was consumed by the substrates. We had the results you can see in this slide, and the BMP tests were carried out to evaluate the synergy between the two type of lab scale tests to assess the outcomes on the potential of methane production and anaerobic activity. You can see the different results of referring to the sludge and digest state, and you can see the different results we have obtained. As Michela said, one of the possible disadvantage is the mineralization, chemical or biological mineralization of the biodegradable substance, which is mineralized and cannot be used to produce methane. In this case, results here refer to fresh sludge. You see the results of volatile solids and the other elements. Mineralization didn't occur, so total and volatile solids did not change, but suspended and volatile solids reduced. This means that there was more solubility and better support to aerobic digestion. So this emerges also in the results obtained on CO2 and organic nitrogen. We have nitrous and an increased the TSS reduction from 7 to 13 and VSS reduction from 1 to 17. So also on a lab scale, we have observed in a different fragmentation, separation of COD, we have observed an increment of VFA by 25%, representing the last element of the anaerobic degradation chain that is used to produce methane. And there was considerable increase of soluble and total proteins. So the results in lab scale were similar to those obtained in full scale. As for BMT on the sludge, for all the ozone dosages, there was an increment of methane production potential that reached from 38 to 74%. So this is related to an increase of anaerobic degradability. So this proves that after being treated with ozone, the organic matter is more available for anaerobic bacteria. We carried out analysis of degrading kinetics to measure the time to reach 50% of BMP. We observed that for low dosages, the variation is not meaningfully significant. There is a variation for the highest dosage. When you see the curve of BMP, the one in dark green, you see that there is a delay phase at the beginning, which could be provoked by the effect of ozone on anaerobic biomass or the presence of residual oxygen. So there could have been an initial inhibition phase, whose effects are eliminated over time. And the potential of methane production definitely increases. As for the digestate sludge, as said before, higher ozone dosages were used compared to those used for fresh sludge. This implied mild mineralization of volatile solids. The effect of solubilization were more evident, even more evident. The ratio of soluble CO2 to total CO2 increased from 1 to 21, and the ratio between soluble and total organic nitrogen increased from 2 to 27%. VFA increased by 275%, and similarly, the soluble and proteins and carbohydrates increased. We observed a reduction in alkalinity. As Engineer Catenacci said, this is very important, is a parameter very important when assessing the operation of a digester. Probably this is due to stripping of CO2 or nitrification. This is an element that has to be observed and taken into consideration. As for the BMT test on digestate sludge, we see increases from 115% 3% to 394% of the methane production potential, but these results needed to be related to the type of substrate that was analyzed, because the residual anaerobic degradability of the sludge coming out of the reactor. But anyway, the ozone dosage, maximum dosage, was able to increase this by far. So there was, as you can see in the graph, no delay phase at the beginning. The lab test supporting the full-scale experimentation proved to be valuable and reliable, because we observed the same trends in full scale, and these are very good. They represent a very good tool to analyze ozone use from the viewpoint of effectiveness, but also in terms of economic and environmental sustainability. I give the floor to my colleague one more time. Thank you, Davide. As for pertains to what Professor Antonelli mentioned when she said a process has to be assessed also in terms of full-scale applicability, possibility to implement, and sustainability. So we can test everything, but we need to know whether this can be done in real conditions. We tried to carry out a first estimate in terms of economic and technical sustainability, and we have come to these results. I would like to concentrate on the graph, which is clear, which clearly shows what we want to show. The green bar represents 100% of ozone cost, energy cost, oxygen consumption cost, and amortization of plants, of the initial investment in plants. So adding these three items, cost items, we can get the cost of zone. Can we have a return? Can we balance the cost when we apply ozone treatment? In the case of a pre-treatment, so treating sludge before it gets into the anaerobic digester, the answer is yes. When we talk about 20 we obtain an amount of methane that covers approximately 50% of the cost. Methane that is used to produce energy, so it brings about a saving in power supply. So this could cover 50% of the zone production cost. Then we have a large share corresponding to 80% that represents the saving from reducing sludge removal. In lab test, we noticed that we have 10% lower production of sludge that costs 180 euros per ton. So this means that a lot of money is saved not to dispose of this sludge. We can also add one share if we recover oxygen that is not used. Extra oxygen from ozonolysis can be sent to the oxygen or air-filled plant, representing a sort of saving also from this viewpoint. Overall, the ozonolysis process can attain a coverage of 150% of the cost of using ozonolysis itself. in the pre-treatment configuration, when it comes to post-treatment configuration, meaning treating the sludge coming out of the digester or recycled sludge, maybe the compensation of cost may not occur, but it has to be also evaluated in relation to the technologies, transfer technologies to be used in the whole process. So from the cost analysis makes it appear less cost effective. And why? Because when we pre-treat, we emphasize an intrinsic characteristics of sludge, because sludge is prone to purification, and we make it available for this. In the post-treatment, we are working on already degraded sludge, so it's difficult to get an advantage. We need to work more to get an advantage from this. So from this viewpoint, the post-treatment may also represent, may also offer some operational advantages, because the sludge is definitely easier to work compared to the one that is pre-treated. Let's have a look at this. This is what comes in the digester. So, well, that was hard to use the plant in continuous cycle. It was difficult because the sludge matrix is characterized by coarse material, many other matters and substances. So it's a more demanding operation time terms, whereas the post-treated phase allows us to work with more fluid, more flow in matter. So these are the pros and cons to balance when it comes to calculate the advantages, also economic ones. So in conclusion, we have been updating literature. Examples of full-scale applications are definitely rare. We actually found only one in Italy, as Federico was saying. This is the first one. So this was a really training session for us, a training opportunity that showed us how we can approach this type of treatment. It highlighted the results that can be attained, confirmed by lab tests. So this opens up to the possibility to implement this solution, especially today when we are facing problems relating to the need of electric power, biogas. So it opens up to many different types of applications. But as Eleonora was saying, we haven't finished yet. We need to confirm these outcomes also in another plant. We need to validate the real reduction in sludge production and sludge yields, and the next steps we are going to do with Polytechnic University is to evaluate the effects of sludge undergoing ozonolysis and then treated in anaerobic conditions, and the effect of the sludge on the dewatering phases, because ozone can dissolves, but it also releases colloidal substances that can affect the watering phase. Actually, so between these two phases, the sludge goes undergoes 30-40 days of dewatering. So at the phase of clarification of surnatant is going to be performed by the digesters. But these are the aspects you need to evaluate, and with the next activities we're going to do in cooperation with Politecnico, include also a project that we are going to develop with CAP. It's a UN-financed project, Horizon 2030. Thank you very much for your attention.
Come ultima nota volevo solo dire che noi presentiamo i risultati, ma in realtà sono davvero tante le persone che hanno partecipato a vari team, dal fare le analisi, a tenere l'impianto acceso, al sistemare, a smontare l'impianto in venture 1000 volte, rimontarlo, quindi a chi ci ha consigliato, i nostri colleghi del staff,
many times those who offered their expertise, their consulting services, so a large group of people, and we are ready to go on. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Michela. Thank you, Davide, for being perfectly, for sticking to the schedule, for offering us so many data, so many information. So what was only an hypothesis 20 years ago, those figures, 10, 15% were not exalting. There was no assessment of BMP. So sludges were not considered as a source. So today it's about time to analyze and investigate this topic in depth, and especially when it comes to the decision made to pre-treat sludge. I was not convinced about this decision because post-treated sludge can be worked, can be always treated, and but which is not the case, always the case with the pre-treated sludge. But in this case, we could risk wasting some ozone. But research, the project proved this hypothesis wrong. So we have now such a large amount of data that makes us credible. So we can continue with the activities, also to assess how it can be used for farming, and ozone can be considered as a promoter, as a favoring element for a production of biogas. Engineer Caldara has a question. I was sure about it, but I can see there's a question from a guest here. I'd like to have a more precise detail. The temperature of sludge inside the digester during the test, what was the temperature, and what variations occurred on the temperature inside the digester? 35 degrees centigrade. In some phases, some moments, this raised to 35 degrees. I am happy for engineers. I thought that in laboratories where the realm of a female biologist, I was afraid there was no room for engineers, and on the opposite, two engineers have just delivered the speech. One was a woman again, and a young man. So I'm happy to see engineers also in working in labs. You have certainly noticed the incredibly large amount of data that made it possible to reach outcomes, balances, and so on and so forth. I have seen some managers of ozone generators. One is here with us. When we produce 1 kilogram of ozone starting from air, 2 kilowatt
Quando partiamo con l'ossigeno,
are necessary. When we start from oxygen to produce 1 kilo of ozone, so we need 10.
Magari qualcuno vi può dire di qualcosa,
so
magari
correct me if I'm wrong, but keep in mind that together with the kilogram of ozone, there are 9-10 kilograms of oxygen. When you produce ozone, you also waste oxygen or air. So obviously what we have seen and what we have understood is that we need to keep oxygen, keep taking it from the ozonation tank and we put it in the biological reactor. So this is so important to evaluate, to compare an oxygen fueled plant and air fueled plant. We haven't realized yet that air contains 80% of nitrogen that only reduces the efficiency of oxygen. I am sorry I've been insisting on this. And I keep on insisting this, but it's worth repeating this concept. So we are growing passionate about ozone. We have said that ozone makes it possible to recover oxygen. Ozone generators consume, depending on what you need to produce ozone and electric power. You can confirm we need 7 kilowatts for large plants. We use more oxygen. We also must remember that we already saved, we already paid for that oxygen, so the user of ozonation plant spends less for oxygen and to managing the plant. Half an hour coffee break and we'll start with the last speech. Thank you very much.
Bene. Allora, presentiamo l'ultima
We
presentazione
present
della giornata,
the last
sempre del laboratorio.
lecture
Dico che la dottoressa Pasinetti
today,
farà forse le conclusioni
from
e
the
quindi
lab, and
Giorgia,
Pasinetti will
non mi
make the
ricordo il tuo
conclusions.
cognome,
So Giorgia
fammelo vedere perché Genini
make,
è giovane, io non sono
Giorgia
sempre in laboratorio,
Genini will
e ancora
make her
Michela, giusto?
presentation.
Ci
Again
parleranno
with
dei
Michela.
microinquinanti emergenti.
They
Il tema è sempre l'ozono, capace anche di affrontare questo
micropollutants,
problema di cui non si parla ma che è forse più grave di quello che non pensiamo per la salute umana. E quindi vi lascio 3/4 d'ora. Mezz'ora? Se state in mezz'ora, molto meglio.
Half an hour
Grazie ancora.
time for you. Thank you very much.
Allora, buonasera a
So,
tutti.
good evening.
Questa è l'ultima
This is
presentazione.
the last
esporremo i risultati
presentation,
ottenuti
and
nel
we will
trattamento
illustrate the
del
results
resio in uscita dalla
obtained
filtrazione
in
del
ozone
prodotto
tertiary
San
treatment
Giuliano mediante
for pharmaceutical and personal care products removal from municipal wastewater plant of San Giuliano.
Gli enti coinvolti sono stati
In this
ovviamente Capo, il
case,
Politecnico e
institutions
l'IRSA
were
CNR che si è occupata di
Polytechnic,
tutta la parte
IRCA,
analitica.
CNR that dealt with the
Allora,
analytical
abbiamo
part.
installato un impianto
We
pilota
installed
appunto a San Giuliano,
a pilot
un
plant
impianto che
in
era
San
costituito da una
Giuliano,
doppia colonna
consisting of a
volume
double
utile di
column with a
600
useful volume of 650 liters, 325 per column, and we had ozone generator GS040 with 200 grams per hour, and we exploited very little because very low dosages were enough, and the first column was in countercurrent with respect to the ozone flow.
there was a FAD with porous plates on the bottom of the column, whereas the second column was in equi-current, and we were controlling ozone production, the input and the output, to evaluate the yield of transfer, and we also analyzed the solved ozone in water in order to actually see only the reacted ozone. This is the experimental plan. We made a series of analytical campaigns with only ozone treatment, evaluating more retention times, especially time from 10 to 15 minutes per column, so 20 to 30 minutes in the pilot plant, and then final test tested the IOP and ozone plus hydrogen peroxide, because certain compounds were refractory to ozone treatment alone. So each test lasted about 4 hours and included indeed the making of 3 composite samples, and these samples were collected for each sampling point, mixed instantaneous samples collected every 20 minutes, so 8 samples collected every 20 minutes that were representative of the operation of the plant in that period. The plant was started the day before in order to obtain the operation balance and to have operational conditions that were representatives since the very beginning of the test, without having to wait the retention times. The analytical setting of micropollutants is the following: 12 pharmaceutical products, antibiotics, antiepileptics, anti-inflammatory, and anti-hypertensive drugs. Then there was one pharmaceutical transformation product, gabapentin lactam, transformation product of gabapentin, and then an industrial compound that was a corrosion inhibitor, methyl benzotriazole, and 5 fragrances derived from personal care products, salicylide, galaxolide, galaxolidone, fentolide, and tonalide. And then also trace elements were analyzed, especially from metals, in all of their forms. We were mainly interested in analyzing the chrome, because this may become chrome 6. That was an undesired product, so our attention was towards chrome 3. Other analyses were made, especially in gas mass, to evaluate the organic composition of the wastewater in the various treatment phases, and more conventional analysis, COD, TOC, and alkalinity, and then the dissolved ozone concentration analysis, temperature, conductivity, and UV254, which is an indicator of the organic substance containing the double bonds of carbon, and then also the disinfection effect of the process through microbiological parameters such as toxoid coliform, Escherichia coli, and Enterococcus. Then also a hydrodynamic modeling was performed for the pilot plant with a co-tracing tester, in particular sodium chloride, and from the analysis we saw that the pilot plan consisted of indeed 90% model completely mixed, and this confirmed us that the samples we took were representatives of the process itself. Here you see the analysis that were made, the input and output of the plant, and the process with ozone actually determined a reduction by 20% to 50% of the organic content expressed as COD or TOC, 40% reduction in the absorbance index at 254 nanometers, and then there was also a reduction of the suspended substance with reduction of TSS from 6 milligrams to 1 milligram per liter, with simultaneous improvement of the organoleptic characteristics of the wastewater. You see in the picture the input, the yellowish aspect of the wastewater, and at the end the wastewater was quite clear. This is the characterization of micropollutants. You see, well, the scale is nanogram per liter. And the compound that is mostly present, methylbenzotriazole, that was a corrosion inhibitor. And here you see also the fragrances, in which we have 10 to the 4th for galaxolide, galaxolidone 10 to the 3rd, tonalase 10 to the 2, and the celestolide or fantolide were not present or close to the limit of detection. And then we have the series of drugs, ibersartan, diclofenac, ofloxacin were the mostly present, that are anti-inflammatory antibiotics, they're antiepileptics. So from a concentration of 10 to the 3rd to 10 to the 1. And we are always talking about nanograms per liter, so very reduced concentration. Here we have the characterization in terms of metals. In this case we have the scale in micrograms per liter. The concentrations change from metal to metal. We see aluminum, iron, and zinc, whereas those contained in traces were cadmium, cobalt, chrome, and also these who were very close to the thresholds of detectability. And here we see the results. In general, the tested operating conditions are the one illustrated in the table. So from 12 minutes retention time, these are average values. Then we dosed in the first column 1.6 milligram per liter of ozone. In the entire plant, 3 milligram per liter of ozone, so very much reduced, with yields of transfer that were about 83% in the first column, reduced to 60 in the second, because there was a less organic substance to be removed, and the average was 75% on the entire plant. And here you see the yields of removal of all the analyzed compounds, and in yellow you have the compounds for which the removal rate depended on ozone dosage. The more ozone I was dosing, the more substance was removed, whereas in the green frames 100% of removal was obtained regardless of the dosage. As an average, it was possible to obtain removal rates equal to 95% for almost all compounds. Some compounds are an exception, galaxolidone, and also the gabapentin lactam, and the same for lamotrigine. And for these three compounds, they were more refractory to ozone treatment. So facing this resistance, additional tests were performed for advanced oxidation with ozone and indeed H2O2 in the second column. In the first column, that is the first histogram of the 4 graphs, only ozone was dosed in the usual concentration, 1 milligram per half liter, whereas in the second column, different dosages were tested of H2O2 expressed in mole to mole of H2O2 with a variation from 0 to 2. So increasing the H2O2 dosage, the yield of removal and the removal rate of the compounds increased with an increase by 20% of removal rate for gabapentin lactam, irbesartan, and tonalide. Whereas what was very important was the increase in removal rate for galaxolidone, whose removal rate increased by 67%. And then the removal rate in the first column of galaxolidone, it was first negative, because in the first column, part of the particulate material was dissolved in water, and galaxolidone is indeed similar to sludge. So it is found on the particulate, and in the first column we dissolved in water and we removed it in the second column. So its refractory nature is because it's not so close to ozone, but because it adhered to sludge and then was released in the water during treatment.
Before giving the floor to Georgia, I'd like to say that we have carried out an economic cost analysis, cost sustainability of the process, considering the low dosages. The process is sustainable. In this case, the only saving element is represented again by the oxygen recovery. If we plan to recover the oxygen coming out of columns, we can attain a 25% cost savings. So this is in line with the logic of circular economy and the view of the process with an holistic approach. And now it's your turn, Georgia, to evaluate effect of ozone on organic composition. We carried out quality analysis in gas mass gas, and to the left you can see the left graph referring to the families of compounds identified in the analysis. As for the inlet samples outlet of column 1 and column 2, you see that the sample inlet is characterized by the presence of aromatic hydrocarbons. We have a distribution of organic content in the first column, reducing the relative percentage of hydrocarbon content compared to an increase in ketones and phenols. The second column shows a general reduction in the organic content as a chromatographic area, with particular reference to the fraction of hydrocarbons and ketones. We can follow the effect of ozone by evaluating the molecular weights of the compounds we have found inlet and outlet of the plant. The first and second column after treatment, we can observe that generally in the second column, the fraction of compounds with a lower molecular weight is lower, and disappearance of IPM compounds, 200 and 400 grams mole. In all sampling campaigns, the efficacy of the ozone treatment in terms of disinfection was assessed. We have followed some pathogenic integrator microorganism, Escherichia coli, Enterococci, and total coliform. As you can see in the graph, an outlet of the first column, we have an average 4 logarithm 5 logarithm activation microorganisms, and it's even higher in the second column, the outlet of the second column. It reaches the 5 logarithmic units, which means that the disinfection is successful. Some toxicity tests have been carried out to evaluate any possible effects following the ozone treatment. We have used daphnamanian in 24 days of sampling, test with video fishery in 6 German days, and it turns out that no significant variation for daphnamanian, and for video fishery little effect, and some effect also for the test, chronic toxicity test with algae in outlet from the second column. All data are within limit imposed by the law. In cooperation with Bologna University, in particular with Professor Fabbri, we evaluated the eco-compatibility of water inlet and outlet after being treated with ozone. We have evaluated in particular the extrogen and estrogenic potential. As for the estrogenic potential, we have carried out the screen test on the sampling campaign January-March 2021. This makes it possible to identify estrogenic agents on cells of breast cancer. For the presence on cellular membrane of estrogenic receptors that, when activated, cause an increase of molecular proliferation. So the estrogenic potential is expressed in a proliferative effect of these molecules. So the samples tested after being treated showed no growth in proliferation effect, referring to the samples and the cells grown in treated water. So this means that also after ozone treatment, no compounds with estrogen-like activity developed. Well, so there was the opposite, that the treatment helped to effectively reduce the presence of substances with estrogen-like activity, which were found on 3 inlet samples. So to confirm that this proliferation effect was due to molecules estrogenic-like activity, a screen test has been carried out. And as you can see in the graph at the bottom with the fuchsia bars, you see with this inhibitor the proliferation potential is reduced, thus confirming that in inlet samples, molecules having estrogenic-like that were degraded after being treated with ozone. In no tested samples, inlet and outlet samples, showed a reduction in cellular vitality. This means that there are no potentially toxic compounds, and especially after the ozone treatment, that could compounds that could have jeopardized the cell activity. We carried out also a test assessing the mutagenic potential of treated water before and after ozone treatment. This was called Micronucleus Test, using the same breast cancer cell line that makes it possible to measure the binucleated cells. They form spontaneously in cells also with no mutagenic agents. The test aims at determining a number of micronuclei in a number significantly higher in those cells compared to control cells in pure water. The results, in this case, the cell wouldn't be able to repair these flaws, thus originating some carcinogenetic effects. In no tested inlet and outlet samples was found a number of micronuclei different from the control sample. This suggests that there are no mutagenic substances in inlet and outlet samples after ozone treatment. So this makes us conclude that the produced water is of good quality. I give the floor.
Yeah, substantially concluding on the tested process resulted effective in removing micropollutants in order to remove more refractory compounds. It is better to apply advanced oxidation process, and the disinfection test and the analysis of bacterial counts confirmed us that the ozone process indeed is quite effective, especially in tertiary effluent treatment, and toxicity test demonstrated that in this specific case, ozone treatment did not cause an increase in acute toxicity or chronic toxicity, according to indeed the oxygen-like activity. And in additional note, this last test actually represents, in our opinion, the characteristic element on which we should focus, because to carry out an analysis of micropollutants at those concentrations is not only very expensive, requires a lot of time, and in addition to that, there is a difficulty in interpretation and execution of these analysis, also with some doubts about indeed the reliability, because we're talking about nanograms. There's a great complexity in the analysis of these compounds. In the end, we just get a picture either of whether there is or there isn't. So there might be a compound, a byproduct that we may not measure because we don't see it. But there might be something else that could determine criticality at this discharge. The toxicity tests, especially those presented by Georgia, then provide aggregate information about the quality of water and tell us whether the water is good or not, regardless of what is inside. But we are able to say that that water is compatible with the environment, and so with the receiving water basing, because they do not contain elements that may cause mutations. So this could be indeed a more complete point of view rather than a pure chemical analysis in itself. Thank you. Very good. So the day has finished. Do you have any questions on this complex topic of micropollutants, emerging micropollutants, and toxicity? We have seen how the nanometric analysis of these pollutants is quite complex, and the residual toxicity of wastewaters is probably easier to be tackled. If you don't have any questions, we would like to thank the presenters. We would like to thank the entire SIAD. We would like to thank you as attendees, colleagues and guests. Then reminding you of tomorrow, there is a second appointment with Canziani and our presenters who will complete the presentations, and Uniaco as well, that will present their own vision of sludges and treatment plants, and we are working a lot, very much with them. They have been operating in Bergamo for over 40 years, and lately they have some innovation, especially in the sludge treatment, which is quite strategic and important. If you don't have any question, I'd like to conclude the day. Thank you.